Hello, Soch 322. This is Tuesday, October 28th. This lecture today is on religion and class, or as I sometimes call it, religion and inequality. A couple of quick overview notes. I'm going to, in this lecture, be talking about the Liston Pope reading that you did for Monday, giving some preview of the reading from McKinney that you're doing for a critical reading assignment due tomorrow, and then a little quick preview of Friday's reading from Jerome Baggett about Habitat for Humanity, a project or an organization that many of you are probably familiar with. Before I dive into the lecture, though, let me say a few things. Your online posts, for the most part, have been really terrific. You guys are jumping in the material. You're getting what some of the conversation is about when it comes to religion and politics, and thinking through ideas like the culture war and civil religion. I'm glad you guys are getting all that stuff because it's all going to be really crucial to that final paper, of which I'm going to be posting instructions for that either today or tomorrow. And then finally, in terms of helping you for that final paper, I'm going to be switching up the readings a little bit next week, making them a little easier. In case you weren't tuned in, also, there is an enormous presidential election that is going to occur next week, and we are in the run-up to at this point. So my readings are going to be hyper-focused on religion and voting, and I'm going to clear space in the middle of the week so you have time to kind of take in what's happened with the election. But more importantly, it gives me a little time to dig up some real quick, up-to-the-minute research on how religion mattered to people voting in this election. So that's all by way of saying that I think it's an exciting time to be studying this stuff. Today, I want to begin with a puzzle. We'll start first with that Liston Pope reading that you did for Monday. Now that excerpt I found pretty interesting, but what I wanted to tell you was that the book that excerpt was from, the book is called Preachers and Mill Hands, from the early 20th century, is a classic sociological work. If you can get your hands on it, I highly recommend it for you. And it's classic for a couple of reasons. One, Liston Pope is a terrific storyteller and kind of setting the scene of community relations, and in particular, how capitalist relations and systems of productions were allowed to basically maintain stability and to continue to occur. Liston Pope studied a town of which there are many towns like this in the late 1800s and early 1900s of textile production. So it's basically taking cotton from the fields, getting it into the mills, and turning that cotton into material that could be used to produce other things, textiles and clothing. Liston Pope's question was basically, how does this system continue to be stable and continue to reproduce itself, to continue to not be questioned, especially in an era, the early 1900s, of which there was really sweeping labor reforms and also union mobilization and Socialist Party mobilization to change situations of real economic inequality and social problems. What's interesting for our discussion here, and the puzzle I throw out to you, is that there was another sociologist in the 1980s named Dwight Billings who went around looking in the historical archives and books trying to find a similar situation to the one Liston Pope studied. However, looking for a situation in which religion didn't just legitimize the social and economic relations of the community as it did in Liston Pope's study, but looking for a situation in which religion actually mattered for changing social and economic conditions. So I give you this lecture on religion and class and religion and equality by starting off with a puzzle as to how religion can operate differently in different conditions. So let me zoom in here to the trusty whiteboard, which might be a little bit more crowded than usual, but let me take you through it really quick. Here, this row, we have Millville, which basically I use as a stand-in for Liston Pope study. Okay, and down here, this row is Coalville, which is a study done by Dwight Billings in the 1980s, using a historical evidence of a coal mining town that existed around the same time as this mill town existed. Then I have a bunch of columns here, and these are what we might call conditions or variables to understand why religion operated differently in Millville and Coalville. First column I have here is, were the churches controlled? Second column is, was there labor alienation and basically drastic economic inequality? The third column is, were individual religious leaders, were there independent religious leaders? Fourth column here is, was there a critical understanding that was developed by religious leaders? And finally, what was the outcome in terms of whether there were strikes and whether there was any fundamental economic and social change? Well, the reading you did for Monday basically pertains to Millville. Pope takes us through some really interesting studies, and he was really fine-graining and getting interview data and giving data to churches and just kind of going around the town all the time to study the place. And what Liston Pope discusses in Millville is that really religion kind of operated in two ways. Both ways, though, had the same effect of legitimating the system of economic and social relations. The first way is that basically religion, he called, was present in these uptown churches. These were basically the churches of the town square, near where all the capitalists and all the professionals and all the power elite of the community lived. And in these churches, he basically showed that they were partially owned by the mills, because mill owners, because they gave a lot of money. There was very little conflict with the ministers. In fact, the ministers tended to see themselves as really part of the elite of the town, and got along well with the mill owners. And that the ministers spent most of their time in what you could call, or what Liston Pope calls, spiritual matters. So talking about abstract theological concepts or general kind of spirituality. And so really not kind of engaging the social conditions of the local environment. The other way religion operated in Millville, according to Liston Pope, was out in the villages. So these are the outlying towns, much closer to the mills, where the workers lived. And here Pope argues that religion was controlled by the mills, and in so doing, religion was encouraged to have a real kind of escapist feel. So, as he documents, some of these churches were completely owned by the mills. The mills had a very paternalistic relationship. They built the building, they gave the money to the minister, and in having a salaried minister, were able to control what that minister did or said. And he notes that there was some conflict in these churches, because there would sometimes be a minister that would come in all fired up by the social gospel, which was a theological movement in the early 1900s that really advocated social reform. These ministers would come into these mill-owned churches. The mill owner would have a problem with what they were saying, and wouldn't you know it, before long the minister would be run out of town. Overall, the picture he gives of is churches that are controlled, owned in a lot of cases by the mills, ministers that are oriented towards otherworldly or spiritual concerns, not local concerns, and that there is very little kind of connection between religious ideals of potential reform or change and the actual social conditions.